dédié à l'élaboration de la stratégie nationale d'inclusion financière. Aussi, d'ici la fin 2020, nous nous engageons à mettre en place un mécanisme de collecte et d'analyse des données pertinents pour renforcer les mesures d'inclusion financière en faveur notamment des jeunes et des femmes. Par ailleurs, nous nous engageons d'ici la fin 2021 à élaborer une stratégie nationale d'inclusion financière ciblant principalement les populations qui ont été identifiées lors de l'atelier de sensibilisation des acteurs nationaux sur l'inclusion financière qui s'est tenu à Nouakchott du 8 au 9 juillet 2019. Ces populations cibles comprennent entre autres les personnes vivant en milieu rural, en milieu urbain, les personnes handicapées, les déplacés, etc. Par ailleurs, et aussi, nous nous engageons à créer un environnement réglementaire propice au développement de la finance numérique en mettant en place une réglementation pour les paiements mobiles. Je vous remercie, messieurs et dames.
Merci beaucoup. We would like to now invite the Central Bank of the Republic of Uzbekistan as the 71st country to come and join the stage and announce their commitment.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Central Bank of Uzbekistan, I would like to avail myself on this opportunity to pledge our commitment to the Maya Declaration. We are pleased to become the 78th institution and 71st country to commit the Maya Declaration. It's essential to underscore that the Maya Declaration itself embodies the commitment to collective effort to boost economic as well as social well-being of the unbanked through a greater access to the financial service and products. Despite being a relatively new policy area, financial inclusion is our foremost priority that we consider as one of the fundamental pillars of the central bank's policy goals. In this regard, we have embarked on comprehensive measures alongside with relevant stakeholders in Uzbekistan. To judge our progress, it's not whether we have impressive results right now, it's whether we have strong political will and commitment to build shared prosperity through advance in financial inclusion with a strong backing by our partners in the AFI network. Dear colleagues, there is no way to address this global challenge but to engage in collective effort and learn from each other. In terms of our commitment, aside from adopting national financial inclusion strategy, we are also strongly determined to attain positive results in the following: providing 24/7 consumer service in the banking system, providing remote financial services, especially for those who live in rural areas, decreasing the volume of off-bank cash turnover through a greater access to the financial services, formulating the set of financial inclusion indicators, executing a survey for assessing the level of financial literacy, launching educational website. By declaring this commitment, we pledge our utmost efforts in achieving them and to share our story and lessons with the AFI network. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Since the last GPF in Sochi, 3 new countries made Maya commitments. However, we also have a new member institution who has made a commitment for the very first time. We would like to invite the 79th member institution to commit to the Maya Declaration, de Superintendencia de la Economía Popular y Solidaria de Ecuador to share their commitment with all of us. Welcome.
Good morning to everyone. Thank you for your attention. We want to make our speak in Spanish, please.
As they make their speech in Spanish, I would like to remind you the languages, English is 1 and French is 2. Thank you.
Buenos días con todos. Muchísimas gracias. En primer lugar, queremos agradecer toda la gentileza que Ruanda, sus autoridades y el AFI han tenido para con nosotros. Este evento realmente ha sido una oportunidad enorme de conocer lo que el AFI es y de convivir con aquellos países e instituciones que son miembros. Queremos, desde la Superintendencia de Economía Popular y Solidaria, anunciar ante ustedes el gusto de ser la institución número 79 en firmar el compromiso maya. Y básicamente lo que deseamos hacer dentro de los fines del compromiso es trabajar para tener mejor información, para hacer poder mejor inclusión, poder desarrollar nuestra Estrategia Nacional de Inclusión Financiera, que debería ir necesariamente acompañada de una excelente Estrategia Nacional de Educación Financiera. Queremos además trabajar para mejorar los estándares globales de proporcionalidad, generando un marco regulatorio adecuado para la inclusión financiera y analizando de manera profunda aquellas barreras que puedan existir para lograr este fin. La Superintendencia de Economía Popular y Solidaria tiene un excelente equipo de trabajo. Y es por eso que yo he querido pedirle a aquellos que trabajan conmigo para lograr estos fines que me acompañen hoy. Queremos trabajar mucho para poder venir ante ustedes el siguiente año y el año después de ese y contarles todos nuestros logros, pero queremos también estar a la altura de las instituciones que ustedes representan. Queremos contar historias como la que ustedes nos cuentan y queremos trabajar por mejores días, no solo para nuestro país, sino para el mundo, para que nuestros hijos tengan tranquilidades que nosotros en este momento no podemos tener. Por dormir mejores noches más tranquilos sabiendo que este mundo es más inclusivo, les dedicamos nuestro trabajo y nuestro esfuerzo con el compromiso maya. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you. The 4 institutions join our existing members who have been making financial inclusion commitments and reporting progress on a regular basis. We would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the new commitments made by our members. Please join me in giving another big round of applause to them. We are going to see the new commitments made by members. The Central Bank of Russian Federation, Bank of Uganda, Banco Central de la República Argentina, Bangladesh Bank, Banque centrale des États de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, National Bank of Cambodia, Ministère de l'économie et des finances de la Côte d'Ivoire, Central Bank of Egypt, Ministry of Finance, Eswatini and Central Bank of Eswatini, Bank of Ghana, Banque centrale de la République de Guinée, Banque de la République de Haïti, Commission nationale de Bancos y Seguros Honduras, Reserve Bank of Malawi, Bank Al Maghrib, Banco de Mozambique, Palestine Monetary Authority, Banco Central en Filipinas, Central Bank of Seychelles, Central Bank of Solomon Islands, Central Bank van Suriname, or Central Bank of Suriname, Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. We would also like to acknowledge our members who have been proactive on updating and submitting their progress reports on the AFI data portal since the last GPF. In the past years, the global efforts to achieve financial inclusion have transformed the way we look into the various challenges tackled by the Sustainable Development Goals. We are honored that our members have recognized these developments and have joined forces in becoming part of the global solution for the financial inclusion of women, youth, and other vulnerable groups. Once again, we would like to congratulate all of our members for the commitments made. If we could give all of them a round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to launch the Gender Inclusion Ambassadors. I would like to invite the AFI Executive Director, Dr. Alfred Hanig, to introduce the Gender Inclusion Ambassadors.
Good morning. Let me start by saying that this is a very impressive presentation that we just saw. For a long time, for quite a couple of years, we actually thought that we would not hit the 70 countries, but this year apparently was the turning point, and we are now very pleased to see 71 countries that have made a commitment. Now, this morning, we will continue with the launch of the Gender Inclusion Ambassadors, and to set the stage for this activity, I wanted just to remind us there are over 1 billion women globally who are financially excluded. And we felt that the only way to have genuine inclusive financial system is to incorporate gender dimension to financial inclusion strategies and goals. Now, when we met in 2016 at the Global Policy Forum in Nadi, the members of AFI endorsed the Denarau Action Plan. And as you remember, at the heart of this plan, there is a commitment to close the gender gap in financial inclusion. And there is a need to have an overarching gender lens in everything that actually we are doing through our work in the AFI member institutions. Now, this means advancing the agenda of women's financial inclusion, whereby financial services providers serve women by acknowledging them as viable investors with strong business cases. The action plan will also assist regulators in identifying the gender-specific policy gaps and addressing them with innovative policy solutions. This is to empower women using a collaborative model. Now, in recognition of the work that members have been doing to fulfill the General Action Plan and the commitments that are behind this plan, our Gender Inclusive Finance Committee have been looking for the last year at ways to recognize the work of the member institutions who are fulfilling their General Action Plan commitments and are striving to close the gender gap in access to finance. And this is also in support to greater gender diversity and inclusion within their own member institutions. This, of course, includes also developing and recognizing women's leadership. Now, this has resulted in the creation of the Gender Inclusion Ambassadors. These are institutions within the AFI network who are leading the activities in closing the gender gap and supporting women's leadership within their own institutions. And since we are a network of regulatory institutions, I think it is very important also to have a process in place and criteria that are transparent so that everyone can follow and also understand why some of these institutions now have been nominated as ambassadors. To ensure that the selection process for the gender inclusion ambassadors is transparent, we identified gender inclusive criteria to filter the member institutions through in this regard, and these criteria include reporting, for example, a gender-focused policy change on the AFI data portal, just to give you one example, but there are a couple of others, and when I finish here, Helen Wolby will come on stage and quickly introduce the process to you and also the criteria. To be eligible to become a gender-inclusive ambassador, the institution also needs to be able to evidence that they have met 4 of the criteria, which you will be shown shortly. And this will allow other member institutions who are not here on stage today to continue their development and gain recognition in the future for the work they have done. Now, as more institutions reach the threshold each year, we will be able to recognize their progress and celebrate their success as well. And this appointment is for the whole institution to acknowledge that everyone has a part to play in closing the gap, and everyone from throughout the institutions can be empowered to make changes and drive the gender inclusion agenda forward. Now, these gender inclusion ambassadors have demonstrated their commitment to the General Action Plan. We would like to recognize and celebrate the progress that they have made to date. Now, before we asked the institutions to come to the stage, I would like to ask Helen to share with us on the process and the criteria. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Helen Wolby, and I am the head for Gender Inclusive Finance, and I'm also the lead of the Secretariat for the Gender Inclusive Finance Committee. So, to support the work of the committee, the Ambassadors Programme was based on a set of criteria that would be clear and transparent so that all of the membership would be able to see what they needed to achieve to be able to work towards having their institution recognised as one of the gender inclusion ambassadors. So the committee decided that there should be some specific criteria, both relating to policy and regulatory change, but also relating to institutional development. So these are the criteria that they selected. We also have a slight push for you as well, because it's a policy change that has been recorded on the AFI data portal so that it is evidenceable. and also a Mayor Declaration commitment that is gender specific, and it's a pleasure to hear that we have had a number more made this year. We also will have one of the criteria as having a national financial inclusion strategy that has specific gender components and criteria to it. We also have a criteria that the member institutions should be collecting and using sex disaggregated data, and again that this should be recorded on the AFI data portal so that it can be evidenced. We also want to recognise those institutions who have been developing the leadership within their own bodies. So we have a criteria around having a female governor or a female deputy governor, because we know that they can act as great advocates for change, as well as the fantastic male allies that we have. We also have the Leadership and Diversity for Regulators programme that will be starting again this year and be able to take another cohort of wonderful graduates, and we were able to celebrate their success on Monday with a lovely ceremony. So we wanted to be able to include that as one of the criteria. And finally, the fantastic work that the Gender Inclusive Finance Committee do and the oversight that they provide for all of the working groups was another of the criteria that we wanted to recognise. Now, we felt that it wasn't possible for member institutions to perhaps meet all of these criteria, so the committee decided that they needed to reach a threshold of 50%. So therefore, if you want to become an ambassador next year, you will need to have achieved 4 of these criteria out of the 7. So if you are looking at finding out how you can progress, this is the information that you have, and do feel free to come and talk to me at any point during the remainder of the day, or any members of the Gender Inclusion Finance Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. I would like to now invite the chair of the Gender Inclusive Finance Committee and the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Zambia, Dr. Tukia Kankasamabura. You're welcome.
I would like to recognize the presence of the Governor of the Bank of Rwanda and also the other governors present here. I'd also like to recognize the presence of the Deputy Governors, the Executive Director of AFI and his team, fellow delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor and privilege for me to be given an opportunity to give a few remarks at the first ever certification ceremony of Gender Inclusion Ambassadors for AFI. Let me begin by again expressing my gratitude to our hosts, the Governor and staff of the National Bank of Rwanda, for the wonderful arrangements and warm hospitality we've been accorded that has enabled us to have such a successful global policy forum leading to this momentous event. Ladies and gentlemen, as you are aware, almost 1 billion women are still excluded from the formal financial system. According to the 2017 Global Findex database, the gender gap for emerging and developing countries, which include AFI member countries, has remained sticky at 9% since 2011. In this regard, as AFI member countries, we in 2016 adopted the General Action Plan, the AFI Network's commitment to gender and women's financial inclusion. Further, we set ourselves an audacious goal of halving the financial inclusion gender gap in each AFI jurisdiction by 2021. In addition, we've made gender-inclusive commitments in other AFI policy documents, such as the Sharm el-Sheikh Accord and the Sochi Accord, which have now been reinforced in the Kigali Statement. The Gender Inclusive Finance Committee was established in 2016. The work that the committee has undertaken since then has enabled us to see huge changes and developments in gender-inclusive finance policy and regulation within the network. The gender work stream was enthusiastically embraced by all the AFI working groups and other organs, resulting in the production of many knowledge products and tools. As chairperson of the Gender Inclusive Finance Committee, I am proud to see the progress being made by member institutions to close the gender gap in access to finance. When the General Action Plan was first adopted, there were 16 Maya Declaration commitments. As of end of August, there were 32 commitments, and this number is increasing. I was very pleased to look at the screen as well as to listen to the commitments that were being made just this morning, and I'm going to take a tally at the end of it all to see how many more new commitments we have specifically on gender. It is important for us to recognize and celebrate what has been achieved. However, ladies and gentlemen, we need to do more to accelerate the pace at which we are bridging the financial inclusion gender gap. This is especially with regard to in-country implementation as well as innovations. To recognize the efforts by member countries leading the network in closing the gender gap and fulfilling the commitments made under the General Action Plan, the Gender Inclusive Finance Committee, at its meeting held on the 22nd of August 2019, approved the appointment of gender inclusive ambassadors. We appreciate this milestone of gender inclusive ambassadors. This is because of the multiplier effect that this initiative will have towards bridging the gender gap in the AFI network. Ambassadors will advocate for gender inclusive finance within the AFI network at national level and at global level. There will be an amplification of voices and efforts. In this regard, it is very important that we should have the participation of both men and women. We acknowledge that global power still resides in men. Therefore, men have a very great role to play if we're going to move the needle. What will need to be done is to always apply a gender lens to all our initiatives and actions. We must always have women's financial inclusion in contemplation. Evidence abounds that gender neutral is not good enough. Implementation of policies at the national level is particularly important. We have come up with a lot of knowledge products and tools, and what we really need to be doing now is in-country implementation, and that is how we're going to see real results and impact. Ladies and gentlemen, this recognition ceremony is just the beginning. I'm sure you agree that it is right that we recognize the members that are leading gender inclusive finance and give them a responsibility to mentor others and to lead the way to achieve even more in the financial inclusion agenda. I am pleased to indicate that next year, as more and more members meet the threshold criteria to become inclusion ambassadors, we will have more members on the stage to be recognized and certified as ambassadors. It is in fact the desire of the committee to see all AFI network members achieve this status. Let me also take this opportunity to urge the ambassadors and all AFI members to also prioritize the leadership and diversity program that has been established to implement action point number 10 of the General Action Plan. This requires AFI members to drive greater gender diversity within their member institutions, initiatives, and strategies. There's a growing body of knowledge that has demonstrated that gender diverse teams lead to better performance, increased productivity, and innovation. The Leadership and Diversity Program, being delivered in conjunction with Women's World Banking and the Said Business School of Oxford University, will enable AFI members to build a pipeline of women leaders to facilitate diversity. You are therefore all encouraged to apply for the 2020 program. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by congratulating the ambassadors and to thank them for the work they have done so far. This certification is just the beginning. It is not an end in itself. It is rather a commitment to ensure that the achievements scored so far are sustained and built upon. It also means more work as we support the implementation of the General Action Plan in the AFI network and beyond. My advice to the aspirants that would wish to also become ambassadors: we've been given the criteria. It was on the screen. It's been removed. There's 7 points, among which making a gender-specific Maya commitment is one, and also making use of the data portal to log your progress as well as to learn from what others are doing. Also participating in the Leadership and Diversity Program is an important activity. It would also be good for you to seek to serve on the Gender Inclusive Finance Committee as positions become vacant. Once again, congratulations to the AFI Gender Inclusion Ambassadors. Allow me to also extend my gratitude to all other AFI Network members for your contributions to the gender inclusive work of the AFI Network. Together, we can achieve more and contribute to the positive change we want to see in the lives of the many unserved or underserved through inclusive finance. We must not leave anyone behind. I thank you all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tokia. With that said, we are now going to proceed to calling out the representatives of the different banks that are going to come to collect their certificates. I would like to now call the representative from the Bangladesh Bank to come forward and receive their recognition certificate. I would like to now call the representative from the National Bank of Cambodia to also come forward and receive their certificates. I would like to call the representative from the Central Bank of Egypt to also move forward and receive their recognition certificate. To the stage, we are also calling a representative from the Banque de la République d'Haïti to also come and receive their certificate. To the stage, we are inviting the representative of the Bank of Ghana to come and receive their recognition certificate. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to call the representative from the Central Bank of Lesotho to come and receive their recognition certificate. Joining the ambassadors, I'm calling the representative from the National Bank of Rwanda to come to the stage and receive their recognition certificate. To the stage, I'm inviting the representative from the National Bank of Tanzania to come and receive their recognition certificate. Joining them is the representative from the Comisión Nacional Bancaria y de Valores to come and receive their recognition certificate. joining the ambassadors is a representative from the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. And finally, someone who is wearing many hats today, I would like to ask the Deputy Governor, Dr. Tukia Kankasa Mabula, to receive her very own recognition certificate. On behalf of the Bank of Zambia. We're now going to have a photo session of all the ambassadors with the Executive Director. Thank you, dear ambassadors. As Dr. Tukia said, this is not the last. So we hope next year we'll have more members certified. Ladies and gentlemen, as the ambassadors are going back to their seats, let's give them another round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now proceeding to our first plenary session for this morning, and we're going to be looking at decreasing the gender finance gap and how we can move from strong promises to real impact. Please welcome our moderator, Mr. Andreas Proksch, who is the Director General, Sector and Global Programs, GIZ. He will be moderating this plenary session. A round of applause for Mr. Andreas. And the panelists who will be joining him, we have Mrs. Lobna Helal, the Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Egypt. Joining them is Mr. Mamadou Bitey, who is the Vice President of Social Impact, Central Europe, Middle East and Africa Visa. Joining them is Ms. Shungu Gwarinda, Acting CEO of the Grassa Machel Trust. Joining them is Ms. Inez Murray, the CEO of Financial Alliance for Women. Joining them is Mr. Alfonso Garcia Mora, the Global Director of Finance, Competitiveness and Innovation Global Practice, World Bank Group. You may take your seats. Thank you.
Welcome to our next session, Decreasing the Gender Finance Gap from Strong Promises to Real Impact. I think it's an excellent follow-up of the previous session which we had, the nomination of the gender ambassadors, and I'm pretty sure that the gender ambassadors will listen particularly careful now to the outcome of our meeting here to hear what can be done, what must be done. For the next 75 minutes, I would like to invite all of you, that means the panel here, but also all of you in the audience, to engage into an interactive, frank, and above all, outcome-oriented discussion that focuses on moving from strong promises to real impact. All of you know the situation and the figures. The challenges of the gender gap in financial inclusion is very sadly and stunningly persistent. The Deputy Governor of Zambia has called it right now, it's sticky, it sticks, and apart from loud announcement in the past, so far, very little has changed. Still, almost 1 billion women are still excluded from the formal financial system. Much remains to be done. Let's talk about what needs to be done, what can be done, and what must be done. Let's get started. Now here on the panel, I very much welcome once again our 5 distinguished colleagues. I'm particularly grateful to AFI and to Helen Walbay that we are sitting here on a panel with equal gender distribution. There is nothing more shameful to discuss gender issues with a male-dominated panel, so really thanks to AFI and to Helen for this gender distribution. I hope we are going to have a debate which will avoid general lamenting about the state of women in society and the economy. This is the easy side, everyone can do it, but we shouldn't waste our time with general lamenting. I hope we can focus on concrete actions which may have led to success and impact in the past, but perhaps also actions which didn't work out. And a debate, we end up with next steps for each and every one of you, of us, to start, as from tomorrow, everyone at her or his place and organization. I will start now with the panel, but I promise you that we will also have time to come to a discussion with you at the end. Mrs. Lobna Hilal, I think you have spent so far in this AFI meeting more time on the stage than in the audience, so no need to present you once again, the first female governor of the Central Bank of Egypt. You are more or less a member of each and every monetary institution and committee of Egypt. You are the deputy chair on AFI's Gender Inclusive Finance Committee, and above all, according to Forbes Middle East, the second most powerful Arab businesswoman. I think we are very glad to have you also here on our panel. And I would like to start this discussion on a personal and positive note. Could you explain to us a little bit what was the most successful program you personally and the Central Bank of Egypt have initiated so far to close the gender gap in the financial sector?
Good morning. Thank you very much, Andreas, for this introduction. And it also gives me great pleasure to be here among the panelists to discuss something that is really close to my heart. What I believe is very important, or what is giving me a lot of personal, professional satisfaction and was endorsed by the Central Bank of Egypt, is that as I've reached this position of becoming the first female deputy government of the Central Bank of Egypt, is how can we make sure that we can avail the same opportunities to other women, whether within the bank, within the Central Bank of Egypt or within the banking sector at large. And as we today have celebrated choosing financial inclusion ambassadors, we also need within our institutions to have ambassadors, not just at the top level, but at all levels of the institutions, to be able to forward such a big agenda like financial inclusion. So I'm going to look at this as one of the most successful initiatives that the central bank has taken. We have two initiatives under this. What we're trying to do is that to create a level playing field for gender, to have gender-inclusive policies within the institutions. We start with the central bank as a role model for the other banks, and through moral suasion, we encourage the banks to adopt the same policies. For example, at the level of the board representation, we found that only 12% are females on the boards of several banks in Egypt. So we're encouraging now to increase this percentage so that we can reach the percentage that we have at the Central Bank of Egypt, which is 25%. We also have noticed that there is a glass ceiling for women when they get to middle positions. They cannot be graduated to senior positions within the institutions. So we have put together a program for a women mentoring program where we have selected mentors in their fields, very expert ladies mentors in their fields, matched them with 32 mentees from not just the banking sector, from across other industries as well, and through a program that is tailored in a way that where we have one-on-one tailoring, one-on-one mentoring sessions, group mentoring sessions, social events, leadership skills programs. We just graduated 32 potential future leaders in different industries. This had a very positive ripple effect in the banking sector because as we finished our first program, we found that other banks have gone and are now applying the same program within their institutions. So this is a building block for the future. Another program also that we have launched was every year we have a distinct young banker award for distinguished activities, and the award is not just a piece of paper. The award is giving them a chance to go for leadership programs at the most prestigious universities. So we have now 8 that are enrolled, 5 have already graduated, and they have graduated from leadership programs at Harvard School and London School of Business, so that we develop again these skills. And actually the 5 that have graduated have come back today, and they are having leading or prominent positions because our age stops at 35. So they have to be younger than 35, but they have to prove that they have distinct capabilities and promising capabilities. So they have now assumed prominent, not leading, but I would say promising positions within the institutions as they've come back. The beauty of these programs is, as I said, they have created this ripple effect. And as we said here, that we need to have a balanced approach so that all of these initiatives are not just promoted by women. I find that the CEOs of banks, and we have the majority of the CEOs are men, they are interested now in developing these programs, and they are very keen to bring out the best women calibers within their institutions.
Thank you. I think that's very impressive that what you are doing within the Central Bank of Egypt is also spilling over to the commercial sector, and this is always a very difficult task, but congratulations. Let me come to you, Mamadou Bitai. You're the Vice President at VISA, Social Impact Initiative for the Europe, Middle East and Africa region. The interesting thing is it's very difficult how to describe you. You have a profound development background. You have been working for more than 6 years in philanthropy. You are an expert on fintech. Now you're working in the private sector. In Germany, we would say you're dancing on many parties. So it's, I think, quite an interesting life and quite an interesting and widespread professional experience. From your experience, what is the role of the main actors in the field involved in closing the gender financing gap in the public sector, the private sector, civil society, philanthropy and development organization? What are the comparative advantages of the different actors, and on what should each sector focus and concentrate to contribute to an improvement of the situation? Amadou, please.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I would like to join you to thank AFI for inviting us to this forum, but also join you also in congratulating the gender inclusive ambassadors. And I was very pleased to see that among the ambassadors there were also some sort of gender balance, because we are part of the problem and we have to be part of the solution. So I think that it takes a strong partnership to really advance. To your point, I think that first of all we need to say that the task of closing the gap, the gender gap in financial inclusion, is extremely important. I think that it is a problem that is beyond every single actor or institution to move forward, and it brings a broad-based partnership to do that. And to your point, I think that bringing the distinctive contribution of each of the different actors you mentioned becomes very important. What it requires generally, it requires actually to move that to have right policies or appropriate policies, which should be based on evidence. So here clearly, I think that the role of research institutions, academics, in really conducting sound research based on programs that have been rolled out and drawing lessons, packaging them in a way that are palatable, right, by regulators to be able to develop the right and enabling policies and regulations are extremely important. But it's not only about that. It is also about having solutions that work and continuously improving and bringing new solutions that can address the cultural, very local barriers for women, because we can talk about barriers to women financial inclusion in general, but we need to recognize the dimension of very localized cultural barriers as well. And how do you develop bespoke solutions about that? And it's not perhaps always the banks who can take, or the financial providers who can take the risk or have the resources to invest in that. You can partner with philanthropic capital, because philanthropic capital has less constraint and can, through blended financing, really provide the first risk, the first loss in developing and testing and rolling out those products which, if proven to be successful, can be rolled out. One of the specific examples I can talk about is what Opportunity International did in Malawi as one of the first institutions to roll out fingerprint-based and protected accounts. And upon launch of this product, they realized at some point that the uptake of the product by women was growing massively. And at some point they saw that 84% of those who took this product were women. And it was important to understand that actually what really made it successful is the privacy and control provided by the fingerprint-based registration and control, which actually allowed bank officials to be able to resist and block from husbands to have access to account. So this is very locally relevant, leveraging technology. The other thing is also how do we really bring and support and strengthen the fintech ecosystem? Because really they are a complement to what traditional financial providers do. Because sometimes we are not necessarily structured in a way that give us a competitive advantage to reach the bottom of the pyramid. So that last mile distribution are today provided by fintechs that are more agile and can use and are using the technologies available. So it's really bringing how an intelligent combination of those very distinctive characteristics of the different actors that we can bring together.
Thank you so much. I think this is a very good introduction to us from your wide experience. Shungu Gwarinda, thanks a lot of being with us. You are the interim CEO of the Grâce Machel Trust, active in women's economic and social advancement, basically in the regional context of Southern Africa. You oversee the program portfolio spanning the trust right, child rights, women's economic and social advancement, and nutrition teams. Let me ask you first, why is the progress on closing the gender gap so amazingly slow? We have been discussing this issue not only for years and for decades. You are very close to what is really happening, as far as I learned, in the villages, with the people. So we all had great hopes in the past that things would go faster. Why is it so slow? Tell us from your real experiences.
Thank you.
Is it working?
Hello?
Maybe you can, Mamadou,
Yes.
would you share your mic?
And I was going to start off by talking about shared value, so thank you very much for sharing your mic. And at the Grâce Machel Trust, we work beyond the Southern Africa region. It's really across the continent, including West and East Africa. And why perhaps that's important to flag in terms of the question you've asked is really when we look at the whole ecosystem, as he mentioned, around the hardware, the regulatory frameworks. There's the component that really looks at the social factors, the social cultural factors that interface between the women we are trying to serve and uplift, as well as the financial system itself, is where we also have fissures. Within the grouping of women as well we try to serve, there are specific social aspects that really also affect the pace of change. And so maybe to share some key examples of what we do at the Trust is we build networks that are movements for change. And we have a specific network called New Faces, New Voices, which is a network of women in finance. And glad to point out that some of their ambassadors today, the Deputy Governor, if I may, Dr. Monique of Central Bank of Rwanda, and also the Deputy Governor from Zambia are some of our champions in this network. And why this network is very important is in terms of how it works from the bottom to the top of the pyramid, and recognizes and tries to really catalyze change from women themselves, and how we seek to harness and empower in terms of having the knowledge, skills, and ability to access financial services, to drive the demand for financial services that meet women's specific or tailored needs. And these skills range from right at the top of the pyramid in terms of leadership. And we know that in relation to leadership, it is not just the hard skills, but we have research that demonstrates that sometimes women in leadership are affected by issues such as imposter syndrome because, of the social change and transformation that is happening in that sector. So our programs really seek to mentor, as the Deputy Governor as well from Egypt mentioned, women from your entry level to your middle management to your top level, to really ensure that apart from the hard skills and knowledge, the practical components that they need to function as decision makers in their roles, that social cultural aspect does not become a hindrance or a barrier to their advancement. Now, also looking at those women who are at the bottom of the pyramid, we also recognize at the Trust that one of the key powerful aspects of social life that we have, especially in African communities, is associational groupings that go beyond just savings groups, but savings groups that within them really have that strong social capital where women leverage as peers in terms of harnessing their collective power to access services, but also to drive change and transformation that they want to see. And so some of the work we've done relates to also supporting these groupings to harness their collective financial capital. We have an example of a program in Malawi where we worked with women farmers. And one of the key challenges they faced, we know land ownership really remains disparate between men and women on the continent. And the challenge they faced was, collateral to access credit. And so we partnered with another organization and a financial entity that provides guarantee facility for this group of women to access a group loan. And why that was really critical for us in terms of building that collective was an intervention that supported the group dynamics and building that group dynamic, engaging with the financial institutions to provide appropriate tailored mechanisms, but also having other civil society organizations that trust in terms of the credibility of women as borrowers, as producers, to provide this guarantee facility. And really the power of that catalytic partnership for us is what we believe that, this sort of engagement and having this sort of platform for us as a civil society organization is an opportunity to, in some way, demonstrate that the change is possible, but it's really around the investment and building those partnerships to take some of these innovations to scale for us to really drive or accelerate the pace to realize the change that we want to see in closing that gender gap.
Thank you very much, Shungu, and I think your sentence, change is possible, should be rather the motto of our discussion today. Thanks so much for the time being. Alfonso Garcia Mora, you're Global Director of the World Bank Group in the Finance, Competitiveness and Innovation Global Practice with direct responsibility for Latin America, the Caribbean and Eastern Europe and Central Asia regions, financial stability and integrity, long-term finance, global terms. You have to look every morning into your job description in order to know what are all the areas you're in charge of.
The bank changes every day. So
okay.
My job description also changes every day.
Okay. Now, let's come from the local and regional level rather to the global level. Allow me to ask you a slightly provocative question. You're working for the most influential and powerful multilateral development institution, the World Bank Group. And so who but you could tell us what works and what does not work? What do we need most? New gender inclusive policies, new partnerships, or anything completely and entirely different?
Okay, so thank you, Andreas, for this question. Thank you for inviting us, AFI, to be part of this panel. So I don't think that the World Bank is the most influential member of the development community in any case, but I would say that based on our experience and what we have done in many countries, when you look at the gender disparity and the gender gap, and you think on what has really happened, why it has increased or has not decreased in many countries, I think that there are four main reasons why it happens, and it will help us to explain what we think can work. One reason are the legal barriers that still exist, and therefore initiatives in this direction are clear. Probably this is less and less relevant, but it is still an important issue. Second is the digital divide that we have talked about during this conference, during these 2 days. And the digital divide is a key thing because we see that actually in many countries it's a very important issue that does not allow these benefits of technology go to women. Third is the identification, ID, which is a big thing. It's a big problem in many countries, and we know that 25% of women that are not included in the financial sector claim that actually this is one of the main problems that they face. And the last one, which is something that I really would like to emphasize, is the low participation of women in the labor market, which is a key thing. And I think that we have to think a little bit more about it, because sometimes we try to find solutions for financial inclusion for women within the financial sector, but we need to go beyond the financial sector and think what is needed. Why women that have a lower participation in the labor market, we know that only 50% of them, those that are outside of the labor market, are banked. So these are probably the target that we need to think a little bit more how to do that. So what works? Based on these four main, I would say, reasons why this is happening. I think that there are upstream reforms that are critical, and we have seen many good examples on this. Upstream reforms are improved technology, digitalization, etc. Second is digital IDs, identification. We have the example of India that we have used on many occasions as a good example of how to do that. And the third one is this tier or proportional KYC, as a key thing as well. But these are upstream reforms. And why do I separate upstream reforms from downstream activities or initiatives? Because there are many countries that actually have gone forward and have gained a lot of, in these three upstream reforms, have done a lot of things, but actually nothing has happened. And when you look at the data, they are still where they were before. So this is not enough. There are more things that needs to be done. And here I bring the downstream initiatives that I think that are critical and where we think, and there are some initiatives that work well. One of them is digitalization of recurrent payments streams, including G2P, government-to-persons payments, and remittances. This is critical because we know that there is a very significant, very large amount of women, 90 million, that actually do receive government payments in cash still, but 80% of them have a mobile phone. But they receive the payments in cash. So there is a huge potential here. We are working with Bangladesh and with many other governments on this specific topic. Private sector wages. We know that actually 80 million of women receive private sector wages in cash, but actually 75% of these women have a mobile phone. So there is also a big opportunity to actually work on this area. So government, G2P, remittances payments, we think that this is a big example that we need to go down to earth and see what else can be done. And there are good examples in Madagascar as well that we could bring. Second is involving women on the supply of financial services. And this is more oriented to the private sector. So one thing, for instance, that we saw in IFC with a program that they have in Bangladesh, what we saw in Bangladesh, is that women are very reluctant to actually use men agents. They don't like to use men agents, or they don't feel exactly same as when using women agents. But actually, in Bangladesh, there is only 1% of agents that are women. So this is a huge barrier. And this is a huge barrier that probably the private sector needs to solve in order to have an impact. No? Or also related to the industries, to have specific tools, specific toolkits that are women-oriented on the financial services that they provide. So I think that there is a lot of things that can be done from the private sector that will have a very imminent, I would say, or short-term benefit in women access to financial services. And my last point on downstream initiatives is what we call women entrepreneurship, financial access, etc. So related to what I said before, there is a significant number and percentage of women that are completely outside of the labor market, and this is a huge barrier. So working on women entrepreneurship, linking this with the financial inclusion and with e-commerce, for instance, is a key thing, because this can be the entry point for them to actually have access to finance.
Thank you, Alfonso. Thank you, Alfonso. It's very helpful. Ines, Mari, you're the CEO of the Financial Alliance for Women, and they're very widely known and widely recognized experts in women's economic empowerment with a long-standing experience, particularly with Women's World Banking, the world's largest network on microfinance institutions. The motto of this year's Global Policy Forum of AFI is using technology for inclusion of women and youth, and I think you have been very much involved also of the question of technology. Is technology the solution or a solution for the problem we are discussing? How can digital financial services be designed and leveraged to better include women into the financial sector?
Thanks, Andreas. That's a big question. I think, first of all, women are 51% of the population, so they're not really a segment, but it is useful to look at them as a segment and within that sub-segments, because when you're designing products and services for them and channels and how you interact with them through agents and so on, you really have to understand their distinct needs. So when you look at segments, we look at obviously location, age, as well as form of income generation, as well as the actual income. So I think when we talk about women, we need to kind of segment them to really get deeper into how we can support them. What we know is that globally, regardless of income segment, all women need access not just to finance, but also better and more relevant information, financial and business education, networking. There's a very strong correlation between the size of the network that you have and your success as a business person, as well as recognition. There's lack of role models and visibility. So with that holistic value proposition in mind and the idea of clearly defining the segments and doing immersive research with them to understand what their goals are. You know, if we sit in a room we often do this with bankers, we sit in a room of bankers and try to get them to think about the customer. A banker's instinct is just to sell products. What's the product they want? Actually, what everybody needs to do is go back to the woman herself, understand where she's at in her life, what are her goals, and how do we create solutions? So it's about solutions. When you look at technology and you break down that value prop into non-financial services, clearly technology enables access to better and more relevant information, financial and business education. Yesterday we had an excellent presentation from FST Zambia on some of the apps that are being deployed to teach financial education, as well as in the future business techniques and so on. So technology can enable that. Obviously, biometric IDs are the gateway. Technology enables access to networks. Technology enables access to mentoring. It enables access to markets through e-commerce platforms. And then when we look at finance itself, you know, obviously moving from the basic mobile wallets to the capacity to earmark savings into specific life cycle goals, so having envelopes, because this is how women actually manage their savings, to building up the transaction history and issuing nano loans without collateral, to emerging innovations in terms of managing her risk, from insurance to pensions, which we heard yesterday from one of the fintech innovators on pensions. For finance, and now moving to the missing middle, which is the women that are in between microfinance and nano loans and SME finance as traditionally offered by commercial banks. That missing middle, which in Africa, 52% of SMEs are owned by women in Africa, but they have very little access to the formal financial sector. So what do we do about those VSEs? And I'm conscious of Deputy Governor of Rwanda talking about this whole idea of deepening of financial inclusion. So targeting VSEs, or very small enterprises. When you look at the supplier, the commercial bank, for instance, technology enables the integration of information from various sources. So one of the challenges of a commercial bank is that they don't have adequate information from these women who are mainly informal, right? So they don't have all of the ledgers and so on. So integrating information from various sources enables underwriting of the loan. The automation of accounting information. We're seeing a lot of fintechs coming in and supporting getting all of that financial and transaction history to creating financial statements, which then enables cash flow forecasting, which is one of the primary needs that a bank has in order to underwrite the loan. We see the digitization of documentation. Yesterday we heard about digitizing property in Rwanda, right? That kind of digitization of documentation with the IDs will allow a much faster underwriting of loans and enabling better credit on better terms. And then moving to kind of what the real challenge is frankly lack of awareness in the banking community, in the senior banking levels, that there is a women's market, that it does have distinct needs, that there is a business case for serving them. There is a myopia. They do not see the women's market as an opportunity. And when they think about women, they think about risk. They think they're small, they're costly to serve, instead of looking at it in the other way, when our data from our members shows lower NPLs across every segment, micro, small, medium, lower NPLs, higher savings, so it's a stable source of finance, the same products per customer. So once you serve a woman well, she will be loyal. You're solving for her life cycle needs. So we're seeing the business case very strongly in countries where we have strong members that are actually serving the women's market. The business case is all anybody cares about in the private sector. We need to get that data and establish the business case, create the awareness, and work in partnership together with others in the ecosystem to drive this solving the problem of VSEs. If we solve VSEs, the rest, the BOP, is being taken care of. It's going to take time, but we need to create economic opportunity. And there's plenty of women out there that need that support. And I think with technology, in partnership, we can actually come together and serve that market.
Thanks a lot, Ines. I think these were already quite a number of very concrete proposals and issues. I would like to open already now our discussion to the audience, which with such a large audience might be a slight challenge. I would propose that we make a first round of 4 contributions. Please present yourself very briefly, name and the organization you are presenting, and the shorter the question, the better. So who would like to ask a question or make a short contribution? If you would like to address one person on the panel specifically, just mention it. We have mics around. Anyone who would like to participate? Okay, this doesn't seem to be, apparently we managed to answer most of the question here. Yes, Alfonso, please go ahead, and maybe in the meantime the audience still would like to contribute. Yeah, Alfonso, please go. Okay, if there is one, please, and then Alfonso, yes. Could you just stand up and...
Thank you very much. I come from the insurance industry, which is missing in this room. So my question to the panelists is, have you looked at de-risking some of the micro risks that the lenders see through microinsurance? There are pretty good examples around, and it's part of the ecosystem that will allow financial inclusion to actually happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other hand which I don't see at the moment? Well, then, Alfonso, maybe it's your turn first.
Okay, my question is actually
okay.
Because I think that you were touching one thing that we believe is critical, which is the data from the supply side. Yep. So we have a lot of data, thanks to Global Findex, from the demand side, which is very useful, and this is what we use every day to actually describe what is the problem and try to find solutions, but we don't have enough data from the supply side. So there is a need in all these national financial inclusion strategies for regulators, for policymakers, but also probably from the private sector, I don't know how to articulate that, to really come out with a strong and a clear supply side data description. No? Because otherwise it is very difficult to actually take decisions from a regulatory perspective based only on the demand. So we need to see what the supply is doing. We need to see this data that you were mentioning in terms of NPL disaggregation or in terms of interest rates applied by the industry to women versus men, or the cost of finance, etc. No? So I think that this is, and I wanted to know your opinion, because we believe that this is a key thing on the next step. No? We have the demand side data, but we need supply side data, and we don't have much on this.
Ines, a direct response, a direct answer to, a direct answer to Alfonso's question?
Yeah, because data is huge, and really, we have a big initiative actually going with the Women's Financial Inclusion Data Partnership, of which AFI is a partner, ourselves, the IFC, the IDB, the IMF, and there's an increasing, the World Bank, with Karen Groen, who's head of gender, there's an increasing kind of recognition that data is extremely important. And, you know, it is, when you ask a banker to, first of all, bankers, you know, they don't, their systems, a lot of banks have a system which can't track the customer. They can only track individual accounts. And so the kind of origin of this has to be around linking those accounts to an ID, and that ID has to be obviously gendered. So when we're looking at national ID systems, it's really making those available clearly and then tagging by gender. So that makes it easy to do that, and then you can avoid the double counting. So we've seen some countries like Chile, for instance, that have sex disaggregated data on the supply side and have had it for 12 years. So we're working in that partnership to facilitate and, let's say, create the awareness that data is important instead of a cost, right? Because if you go to the IT department, they'll be like, hold on, I have a million things to do, don't ask me to do this. So it really has to, you have to have the business case, we think. You know, you have to go to the banks and say, this is an opportunity, show them other examples, they'll start looking at their own market, and then they'll start looking at their data. And this is a process, it's not going to happen overnight, it is expensive to do that, but in our view, you really have to show the business case. Having said that, the role of the regulator is extremely important, and FIDWIG, which is the group, as you know, of AFI that is looking at data, has sex disaggregated data as a major strategy. We have the Central Bank of Egypt here that's done awesome work in this. We have Bank of Zambia as well as a test case that's doing great. We have a lot of actually other countries in AFI that are really looking at this gender data. I think we're talking about 30 countries at the moment. I just wanted to suggest, just to give you a case of the United Kingdom. You know, the UK, we have Royal Bank of Scotland, and they are the largest SME lender in the United Kingdom. They've had a program for women SMEs for 8 years. They have just worked with the government to co-create an Investing in Women Code, which is essentially a key tenet of this is encouraging the banks to produce the data. 8 of the major UK commercial banks have signed on to that as a voluntary code to Her Majesty's government, right? The reason they did that is because they produced a piece of research, the Rose Review, that showed the gender gap at all stages of the entrepreneurial funnel and created awareness that the gender gap was there in the market. And suddenly, the data, which wasn't mandated by the central bank, but nevertheless by another actor in the ecosystem, shone the light of like, okay, let's be transparent. It's just like the gender pay gap. You know, if we're transparent about it, people will start acting.
Thank you. I'm very glad about this question from the lady representing the insurance industry, because I think the question of regulation of the financial sector and regulation of the insurance sector are both very much related. We will discuss in this afternoon in the session on green finance also more on insurance issues. I think both regulating issues are getting more and more closer together. Is anyone on the panel here in a position to answer on insurance question? Mamadou, can you, and do you give him back the mic? Is it fine for you?
Okay, thank you. No, I just want to say that the point is extremely important, particularly when we are looking at women-led micro enterprises, businesses. We often focus on having access to accounts, having access to credit. But in my view, I think that these enterprises often operate on very tiny margins and are vulnerable to many shocks. Any kind of shock can really throw them back significantly. The other thing also is one can argue that given the dynamism in the sector and use of mobile access to financing is growing. But again, really, you need to look at the suite of financial services that is needed. It's not one, it's not two, it's really a suite that complement each other, that really enables beyond the access to really be able to use the appropriate solutions, financial solutions. And microinsurance in terms of building that resilience that allows to be able to fulfill, in case of shock, to be able to actually fulfill the obligation and remain in the system and not be burnt out of the system is extremely critical in terms of really fostering actually the growing use of the appropriate financial system. So for me, I think that really we need to look in really driving financial inclusion, in really coming more in terms of bundles of different financial services that complement and not focus only on one. Yeah, that's what I would think.
Thanks a lot, Mamadou. I'm looking once again, I think there is one contribution, please, one mic there. The mic here in front, here, could you just stand up and, mic is coming. And then I have another contribution there in the middle, but first you and briefly your name and...
Jürgen Hammer from the SPTF. I have a question to Alfonso and Ines quickly. Alfonso, you mentioned the digital divide, which is something which we observe economically, we observe it generationally, and we observe it on the gender side, of course. And I very much like the concept that you mentioned of the business case. I think that is the answer, theoretically, as long as we can show a business case. But the reality is that the business case is not proven in those questions of the digital divide. Do you really believe that without stronger regulation, the private sector can solve those issues?
Thank you. We first collect the question, then there is a contribution in the middle here.
Merci, bonjour. Je suis Besson Ben Ayouk du Cameroun, ministère des Finances, division de la microfinance. Et... My question goes to the Vice Governor of the Central Bank of Egypt. I would like to know if there is no mechanism at the level of the regulation to weigh the risk of a microfinance institution or a bank that has developed a strategy to address the gender gap in financing, whereby the regulator weighs the risk and in partnership with other stakeholders are able to come in with other mechanism, guarantee scheme or insurance scheme, and those instruments will allow the microfinance institution not to be, I would say, not to be sanctioned, because we know when they are doing the analysis of the portfolio, sometimes they focus only on the risk and they don't look at the components or the segments that have been financed by the microfinance institution. We also realize in our country that when women in their small groups in the village have put in place a scheme to finance their activities, it works well until the regulation comes in, and we just realize after 4 or 5 years that the non-performing loans increases, and before you know, the structure goes bankrupt and collapses. So what is your take on it, and what can you give as advice in respect to the regulatory framework and also other partnerships? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And then one question here in the middle, the lady, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. My question is more regarding the data collection that is done. When we say that 1 billion women are excluded, what does that exclusion really mean? Does it mean that they are excluded by choice? Or does it mean that they are just excluded because they don't have a bank account or a mobile money account? Because what I find is that whether it is whoever, even at the lowest rung of the marginal sector, if a woman reaches out to be included, there are so many simple ways for her to get included that really, I mean, I think the institutions are taking the blame too much on themselves by segregating those women who are just excluded, and we don't know whether they are out of choice or out of compulsion. So I think the data collection itself, we must have a relook at it maybe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And maybe there's one last question from the audience, or at present, yeah, over there. Please, one last contribution. Yeah, can you, on the side there.
Good morning. It's Catherine Touré with Canada's International Development Research Centre. Could we have a couple more examples of the type of immersive research that has made a difference and led to changed policies?
Okay, thank you very much. So, Ines, a very short answer from you on the question of the business model and what do you... Alfonso, let me first ask, well, Ines and then Alfonso, okay?
The business model and what?
Well, I mean, there was a question on the question of the digital divide and the gender issue and whether business models really can help in this. Or Alfonso, do you want to answer to it?
Do you want to go first? No,
yeah.
Okay, maybe
yeah.
I can give my... So what I try to say is the role of the regulator on the digital divide and business case, no? The link of the three things. So I think that the digital divide exists. There is no role for regulators to actually solve it, but what the regulators can really do is to provide the information to the private sector that is needed to make this business case, and therefore to close the divide. So for instance, if we actually achieve to have a good systematic database on the supply side, by which the private sector could actually analyze what is the cost of providing finance to women versus men, what is the NPL one and the other, etc., it will be very easy, as Ines was mentioning, to actually find out that it is profitable, that actually there is a business case to make it. So the regulator, what they have to do is to facilitate this information, as the global FinDex does from the demand side. So my point is, we need the same type of information from the supply side on a consistent, on a comprehensive way, so that actually this can be also comparable from countries and from industries, etc. If we have that, it will be much easier to actually make the business case. And if you make the business case, what should happen is that this digital divide should be reduced.
Okay, Mrs. Hilal, there was a question to you with regard to the level of regulation of the microfinance sector from the perspective of the Reserve Bank, Central Bank of Egypt?
Let me first, start in Egypt. We have, the model is based that deposit-taking institutions are regulated by the Central Bank of Egypt, while non-deposit-taking institutions are regulated by a sister or another regulator for financial services in general. And the model in Egypt is that microfinance institutions are not allowed to take deposits. So actually, microfinance institutions come under the authority of our other regulator. There is coordination between the two regulators to make sure that nothing falls between the cracks, especially that we have recently allowed the banking sector to avail lending to the microfinance institutions. Before that, they used to only depend on their own capital and the regenerated profits. So what we try to do as two regulators is to make sure that our regulatory framework is not disruptive to the industry. The microfinance industry in Egypt is quite vibrant, and with the supply of credit from the banks to the microfinance institutions, the portfolio have seen it double in the last 2 years. And also the beneficiaries, which meant that they could serve more beneficiaries. So we just try to make sure that even when we issue some initiatives for small and medium enterprises that have, for example, subsidized interest, we do not come close to the microfinance industry, so that we make sure that their model that is working now is not disrupted because of actions from the central bank itself. For the gentleman, I'll be glad to put you also in touch with our other regulator if there are specific issues regarding regulations for microfinance institutions.
Thank you so much. And then we still have 2 questions from the audience. One is, we keep talking about 1 billion of women still excluded from the finance sector. Are they excluded by choice? Are they excluded by technology? Why are they excluded? And I think very closely related, the question of other positive examples of what works, perhaps from the research, but also from practical experience. Shungu, would you like to come into it?
So starting with the question on exclusion by choice, I think making a choice means you have information or knowledge on the options that are available to you. And so I think that one of the key aspects around the exclusion is really around the knowledge, awareness, information, and the theme of financial literacy and financial education has been consistent from the discussions from yesterday and starting this morning. So what is critical is that the education, the information, the awareness is what defines whether one has a choice or not. So we strongly believe that that exclusion is really not by choice. And also looking at some of the metrics that we use to define exclusion or inclusion, and that sometimes it's really where we have products and services that do not perhaps fully address the specific needs and requirements of women, and so the choice not to uptake perhaps some product services that are available becomes because they are really not suitable or the appropriateness. So beyond access, for example, we need to also be looking at the appropriateness, relevance, as well as responsiveness of some of the solutions and services that we have. I wanted to also briefly touch on the question around research. So at the Gracia Machel Trust, about 3 years ago, we conducted a survey on growth barriers for women-owned businesses. And one of the key things amongst several factors that came out was around, obviously, access to finance and, misalignment in terms of their profiles, their needs, and solutions that were out there. And what that catalyzed was the realization, again, of you know, as a civil society sector, the need to create or demonstrate solutions that could also catalyze change. And so we are in the process of incubating a women's investment fund that is being designed by women, with, not just for women, but with women in terms of really curating and conceptualizing what that should look like. Similarly, in Rwanda, the New Faces, New Voices with the National Bank of Rwanda and other partners is also working on designing or establishing a women's investment fund. And so I think some of this research is really leading to practical action and solutions that hopefully will also help to really accelerate change that we really need to see in terms of not just inclusion, but inclusion that really changes and uplifts the life circumstances of women who are at the bottom of the pyramid, but also allows those who are in the middle and top of the pyramid to be wealth creators, so that we also have that narrative that really demonstrates that we're not just talking about reducing poverty in terms of financial inclusion, we really want to drive the agenda of creating wealth amongst women as well.
Thank you very much. Mamadou, you had, in our discussion which we had yesterday, very much explained your concept of the difference between access to financial services and use of it. And I think that very much relates to what Shungu was saying. Can you briefly elaborate on this distinction between access and use?
No, let me first say that I think that she really put her hand on the issue because, and relates to that difference also on one research we've conducted with BCG in Nigeria to look at adoption behaviors among micro and small businesses, particularly women-led, the mom and pop shops or the stall owners in the markets, and why they are not accessing certain financial or taking certain financial services. Although the research showed that many of them had some sort of account, but they were not necessarily accepting digital payment or depositing their proceeds in those bank accounts. Why? Because one of the biggest challenges they need, because the cash through which they are, the resources through which they are their operating resources, funds are very small, and they need very fast moving of that. So if digital payment is not providing real-time access to the resources, or if it takes a few days to be available in their account and for them to access it, that doesn't work for them. So basically, you could count them as really having access if you are looking at the number of accounts that they have. But they are not using those accounts because it's just not working for them in terms of how fast they can access and mobilize. The second thing is, they are not, because they are not depositing, they are not also taking credit, for instance. Because the other thing is, you talked about appropriateness. The repayment schedules do not match actually the cash flows that of how their businesses work. Because that those usually the repayment are in regular intervals, but the cash flow for these businesses are not that regular. So how do you develop solutions that approach that? So that's where actually this research is informing our social impact function to try to leverage our business or product creation solutions function to really see how do we create solutions that would allow actually to be able, first of all, to reduce the cost of access to point of sale by simplifying it through that already exists, QR code, bringing it, but also making the payment real-time and availability of the resources. But also, in terms of how do we design in that, also possibility to, for instance, decide if I purchase stock, how can I decide that this portion is something that can be paid right now, the other portion I apply for credit. But also how the repayment can mimic also the cash flow patterns of this. So this is really, and I think that to your point, really looking at really the real challenges and the specificity of the businesses that we are trying to include and how they work, and really looking at how you bring solutions that address those challenges are going to be really important as well in driving inclusion. So, and usage of those. And I was saying just earlier, which is the other thing which is also for me very important, I think, because usage can be consistent only if there is security behind it. And that is provided also by how do you access to those items.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Alfonso, one question to you from the gender perspective. What advice do you specifically give to male leaders here in the room and to male leaders here in the room to truly become allies in the fight to close the gender gap?
So my advice to male will be the same one than to females. So my advice will be, we have to think about it as not only as from an economic perspective, from a poverty alleviation perspective, from all the benefits that it generates. And in my opinion, the actions needs to be implemented and needs to be thought and designed by both, gender equally, male or female. I don't think that we should think that males should do something different from what a female should do. This is something that we are in the same boat and we should think together and on this specific topic. No? So I don't see a different approach. To me, I have it so internalized that if I am a man or if I were a woman, I would do exactly the same. So if I were a woman, I think that I would do exactly the same as I do being a man. No? And I think that this is the thinking that we should have for this type of issues.
Do the three women on the panel agree?
On my personal...
I think I would suggest to the male participants in the forum to recognize and be aware of your presence in terms of, I think, speaking, perhaps interacting from what we perceive and is perhaps a position of privilege, and how that dynamic affects from when a woman perhaps sits in front of a male banker and wants to engage and negotiate interest rates and so forth. So those are some of the really softer societal aspects that I think having that consciousness, but also being aware of unconscious biases that perhaps also influence how we engage and interact is what I would put forward as a key aspect to consider and differentiate between males and men and women in these conversations.
Thank you so much. Deputy Governor Lobner, let me ask you a final and I think very important question to you. I think we have heard many approaches, many things that will work, and now the question is what to do with all the different suggestions. Could you give us one specific recommendation to us and to the audience and fellow regulators? What would you recommend as the one next step to be taken in order to close the gender finance gap? From your rich political experience and also from your work within AFI.
Okay, that's a difficult question. I don't think that there is one, I just have to put this as a disclaimer, that there is one issue that can, or one pillar that can address the gender gap. But I think, and I've heard this on the panel today, and I like this upstream and downstream. I think what I would recommend is that we as regulators, policymakers, and all the service providers should maybe focus on direct use cases. Looking at the whole issue holistically, saying that there is gender gap, we have heard that there are different distinctions. We have the high and the low, the ones that want to come in voluntarily, the ones that don't want to come in. So maybe something that will tackle the idea, the issue pragmatically and put on the ground positive results that can have ripple effect through word of mouth, especially if we're talking about women, is to focus on specific use cases that satisfy a certain need for women, and then structure around it in collaboration with everybody, all the stakeholders, which I just mean regulators and service providers and the recipients of the service itself, to have a success story. And then make sure that it ripples. But it is not just a simple product. A product has to be simple, has to be accessible, and has to be affordable. But at the same time, you have to build around it like an end-to-end or a 360-degree package of other services. And these services could tackle the upstream issues like financial education, financial literacy, digital literacy. And in here we can engage the government or we can engage the private sector. And maybe to make my case more clear is to give you two examples that we have been working on in Egypt. And that are only for women. We have other examples that address the whole society, but I'll just focus on those two cases. For women, we had a case of alimony. 500,000 women in Egypt receive alimony from the government when they are divorced. So we looked at this case. It was brought to us by the attention of the government, but the banking sector has to work on that, and also the mobile providers, because as you rightly said, they have their mobile devices, but they will not use them. So we structured around it a product where they can receive this alimony on their mobile wallets. And we had a campaign, a propaganda campaign. We had also the agents go and teach the women how to use their mobile to receive this payment, because it simply saved for them the cost of transportation just to receive a very minor amount. Some of them had to wait 2 or 3 months to get a bulk of payment instead of going every month and paying for them. And it was also safety for them. They are in their own homes. And now we're building around it other products as well, teaching them as we are rolling out our QR code applications that they can use this money in buying their stuff instead of cashing it out and pay. And the agents that that have taught them this were mainly women banking on our National Council Women Network in many of the governance in Egypt. That was government, private. Another case that we are working on and will be launched very soon is the microfinance recipients. 75% of microfinance recipients in Egypt are women, and we have NGOs that are only focused on women. So now the request came from the private sector. The NGOs, they have a union, they came to us as a central bank and said, we would like to use the new technology, the mobile wallet, so that the woman can receive the payments and also pay their payments, because as you said, it's very fast movement of cash, and they need, it's very costly for them to go back and forth, and there are cases of fraud as well, or they're being used by the agents in a fraudulent way. So we structured again a product where they can receive these payments and dispense through their mobile wallets, and we are actually creating around it, like I said, the 360-degree, which the MFI themselves and the NGOs have now become agents for KYC. They have become agents for also literacy. We teach them, we literate them. So it is a full package. And then we will start to build around it. The women that also are receiving the alimony, now we are introducing another program for conditional cash transfers. Again, this is a huge government program. 90% are women, but what we are trying to build around it is not just receiving it by card or by mobile, also that the service providers are now coming to build on it, like nano credit or upgrading these women from just receiving a conditional cash transfer to having their own businesses, linking them with the microfinance. I think being maybe a banker, investment banker, I'd like to close transactions. So I think having these use cases will have a ripple effect. It will give us also optimism and teach the women or the society at large is that these solutions work for their own benefits. But having said that, again, because we are all here and AFI is all about policy and it's not just implementation, I think all the upstream initiatives that we need to work on, whether it's data collection, research, or literacy in its largest sense, we need to continue on that. The biometric identities, all of this has to be, we have to continue on that path as well.
Thank you very, very much, Deputy Governor, for this very thoughtful and balanced last recommendation. Though our time is over, Alfonso, a very short add-on.
No, just one thing, because I like it very much, what you were explaining. And actually, to me, I think that there is a debate on what is the limit of the regulatory frameworks. I mean, what can we really achieve by a regulatory framework, which in my opinion should be to maintain a level playing field and to actually keep or avoid unintended consequences of regulation, which is one thing. And the other one is the policy maker or the policy actions, no? Which is separated. It's not the same thing. And on the policy side is where we can implement all this positive discrimination that I think are needed, the gender lens, when actually thinking on new policies, etc. No? But maybe we have to separate a little bit more what is the regulation and what is the policy, and then work on each of these streams in a way that we keep the gender lens and we avoid all the unintended consequences that we know that we have created.
Thank you so much. It's time for me to thank, first of all, each one of our panelists for their very thoughtful and well-experienced recommendations and contributions. I think a big applause to everyone on the panel. Thank you. A big thanks to all of you in the audience for your participation and your presence, and also a big thanks to AFI for the composition of the panel and for the very wonderful preparation of it. I think it has become very clear there is no silver bullet, there is no shortcut, but the Chinese have the saying, it's better to light a candle but to complain about the darkness. And I think we all have a lot of candles to light. I think there are many successful approaches, and it will be still a long way to go to the better, more equal world and to financial inclusion of all and across the globe. But I think we are on the way, and we have to do it in a very persistent manner. Thanks a lot, and still enjoy very much the day of today. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Andres Proksch, and every panelist. Ladies and gentlemen, as they come down, I would ask that we give them another round of applause. At this point, we're now going to go for our coffee break, which is downstairs. And we're going to go for a 30-minute coffee break. After the coffee break, we will go for our breakout sessions. I would like to give you an overview of our breakout sessions and the venues where they will be held. The first session will be held in room AD10, and it will be discussing on the strategy for formal financial services, opportunities for informal savings groups. That's the first breakout session. The second is in room AD12, and it will be looking at high-tech, low-touch, accelerating inclusion through digital microfinance. And the last is in MH1, regulating virtual assets, safeguarding integrity whilst realizing opportunities for inclusion. After the breakout sessions, we will then have lunch. We are convening back here at 1:45. For those who have departures today, kindly go to the help desk to arrange for your transport back to the airport. Thank you.
Have you seen my beautiful baby? Have you seen my tomato baby? Oh, baby, softly they cool me temper. Ada, baby, na sugar, sugar.